What if one quiet act of defiance could change the course of a life forever? That's the story of Claire Donovan, a 30-year-old waitress in Boston, a woman who had already lived through more storms than most people twice her age. She wasn't a fighter in the way heroes are written in books or seen on screens. She didn't carry a sword or a badge, and she didn't stand on stages delivering speeches. Her battles were quieter, worn into her skin through long nights and early mornings, battles against debt, against despair, and against the steady erosion of hope. Claire worked at the Silver Chalice, a high-end restaurant, where the price of a single entree could cover her electric bill for a month. Every night, she put on her black uniform, tied her hair back, and stepped into a world of polished floors and hushed conversations. The chandeliers glowed like false stars, while laughter and deals of the wealthy echoed off the marble walls. To the patrons, she was invisible, just another servant, faceless and nameless, carrying plates too heavy and smiling smiles that never reached her eyes. Outside the restaurant, the city was gray and slick with rain, the kind of Boston drizzle that soaked into your bones and never quite left. Inside, Claire moved with practiced grace, balancing trays and taking orders, all while her mind ticked like a clock. How much is left in the bank? Can Daniel's next prescription be filled? Will the landlord give us another week? Daniel, her younger brother, only 22, was the anchor that kept her from drifting away completely. His rare illness meant a life of hospital visits and expensive treatments, and Claire had promised their late mother, that she would never let him fight it alone. That promise weighed more than any tray she carried. And then came that afternoon. The dining room was full of executives in tailored suits, couples sipping wine older than Claire, and the usual parade of regulars who treated the staff like moving furniture. That was when the door opened, and an old man stepped inside. His coat was worn, his boots scuffed, his hair wild as a winter storm. He looked out of place in this temple of wealth. The host froze, panic flashing in his young eyes. Across the room, Gregory Hale, the general manager, noticed too. Gregory was tall, slick, and as cold as the polished steel cufflinks on his wrists. He began to move toward the door, already preparing to usher the old man back into the rain, and Claire felt the knot in her stomach. Then the quiet dread that came every time someone was about to be humiliated for no good reason. She should have looked away. She should have carried the tray in her hands and kept her head down. That was the safe choice, the smart choice. But she didn't. When the old man turned to leave, shoulders slumped under the weight of invisible years, Claire stepped forward. Just one word stronger than she intended, cut through the murmurs of the room. Wait. It was a word that would change everything. In that moment, she wasn't a tired waitress. She wasn't a woman defined by overdue bills or a brother's illness. She was someone standing in the gap, someone saying no to cruelty dressed in fine clothes. A small decision, one that would cost her everything she thought she couldn't afford to lose, and yet open the door to a destiny she never could have imagined. The Silver Chalice was less a restaurant and more a stage where money performed its rituals. The marble floor gleamed like a mirror polished daily to reflect the wealth of its patrons. Every corner shimmered with chandeliers that cast a golden glow, as if reminding the waitstaff of the fortune they would never touch. A glass of Merlot here could cost more than Claire made in an entire evening. To the outsiders walking past the frosted windows, it looked like paradise. To Claire, it was a cage made of crystal and steel. At 30 years old, she felt twice her age, her body worn down by endless shifts that started before noon and ended long after the last dessert tray was cleared. The money should have been enough, yet it never was. Every paycheck vanished into the black hole of medical bills. Her younger brother Daniel was the reason she pushed herself through each night. At 22, he should have been out with friends laughing too loudly at cheap bars, arguing about baseball and mapping out a future. Instead, he lived under the shadow of a rare autoimmune disease that drained his strength and consumed their lives. The treatments, experimental and uncertain, were astronomically expensive. Insurance, with its endless clauses and loopholes, was little more than a cruel joke. Claire's life had narrowed to two purposes: keeping Daniel alive and keeping a roof over their heads. Everything else was secondary, and so she carried her exhaustion like an invisible cloak. It showed in the fine lines beginning to etch around her eyes, in the heaviness of her step as she glided from table to table. She wore a smile that felt more like a mask, a smile she could summon on command but never believed in. The customers never noticed. Why would they to them? She wasn't Claire Donovan. She was simply Miss a moving part in the luxury they believed they deserved. Above them all presided Gregory Hale, the general manager. Tall, thin, and always immaculate, he moved through the dining room with a reptilian smoothness that unsettled even his own staff. Gregory treated wealth like religion, bowing low before anyone with a platinum card, while cutting down his employees with a single glance. He had a special disdain for Claire, though he could never quite explain why. Maybe it was the quiet defiance in her eyes, or the fact that she never laughed at his cruel jokes. She didn't play his game of petty flattery, and for that, he marked her as an enemy. That Tuesday had begun like so many others. The rain outside had turned Boston streets into rivers of shining gray. Inside the restaurant, filled with its usual mix of bankers' attorneys and women who spoke of vacation homes the way others spoke of grocery lists. Claire moved among them like a shadow refilling a glass, here jotting an order, there always aware of Gregory's watchful eye. And then the door opened. He was old 70s, maybe 80s, his hair a wild halo of white, his coat patched at the elbows, his boots scuffed from decades of wear. He carried no briefcase, no polished umbrella, nothing that marked him as part of this world. To the glittering room, he was a blemish, a reminder of something they didn't want to see. The young host froze, his voice cracking, as he asked if the man had a reservation. He didn't. There were empty tables, but Gregory Hale was already gliding forward, his jaw set in disdain. He would not allow such a man to sit among his polished clientele, and in that moment, Claire felt the knot in her stomach tighten. It was a familiar knot, and the one that came whenever she saw someone about to be dismissed, humiliated, cast aside. She told herself to look away, to keep walking, to let Gregory handle it. That was the safe choice. But her feet betrayed her before her mind caught up. When the old man began to turn, shoulders slumped, defeated by nothing more than appearances, Claire stepped forward. Her heart pounded, her hands shook, but her voice carried across the dining room like a crack of thunder. "There's a table open," she said. "I can seat you." And with that, the weight of all her struggles shifted. She had just crossed a line she could never step back from. The standoff was brief but unforgettable. In the middle of the glittering dining room, the clash between Gregory Hale and Claire Donovan stretched seconds into eternity. Gregory's lips curled into a sneer as he leaned close enough for her to smell the sharp tang of his cologne. "Remove him," he hissed, nodding toward the frail old man. "His presence will lower the tone of this establishment." Claire felt the room fade, the clink of silverware, and murmured conversations vanishing into silence. She looked Gregory in the eye, her hands trembling, but her chin steady. And she said it just one word, small yet immovable. No. It was the costliest word she had ever spoken. The air in the room shifted. A gasp rippled through the nearest tables. Gregory's face flushed red, then drained white, his composure cracking. For a heartbeat, Claire thought he might explode right there. Instead, he turned on his heel, his voice laced with venom as he snapped. "My office." Now, within the hour, she was standing in that office, a cramped, joyless room tucked behind the grandeur of the restaurant. the walls pressed in like a cell lined with certificates, and a single framed photo of Gregory shaking hands with a real estate mogul. He paced like a predator, his words sharp as knives. "You've embarrassed me," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "You've embarrassed this establishment. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Claire swallowed hard, but she refused to look away. "I seated a customer. That's my job." Gregory slammed his palm on the desk, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "That was no customer. That was a beggar. And you defied me in front of everyone." His eyes narrowed into slits. "You're finished here. Effective immediately." The word struck like a physical blow. Fired. Just like that. No warning, no second chance. Claire stood frozen, her mind reeling, as he gestured to the door with cold satisfaction. "Collect your things and leave. I want you gone before the next seating." Outside, the rain had grown heavier, drumming against the back alley where she now found herself with a cardboard box of belongings. A thin jacket clung uselessly to her shoulders as the storm soaked her hair, her uniform, her very skin. She hugged the box to her chest and stepped into the downpour, each footfall splashing through puddles as though the city itself mocked her. On the crowded bus home, she pressed her forehead against the fogged window, watching raindrops chase one another down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her tired eyes, damp strands of hair plastered across her cheeks, and a hollow ache written all over her face. The word echoed in her head with the rhythm of the wheels. Fired. 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 How would she tell Daniel? How would she cover the rent, the groceries, the next round of medicine that kept him alive? Fear pressed against her ribs like a vice. But somewhere beneath the panic glowed a fragile ember. She had done the right thing. She had chosen dignity over obedience. And though that choice might cost her everything, she refused to regret it. When she finally stepped into their small apartment, the warmth of home wrapped around her like a thin blanket that couldn't quite reach her bones. Daniel was on the couch, a book balanced on his lap, his blanket tucked around him. His dark eyes met hers, and in an instant, he read the truth she had tried so hard to hide. "Claire," he said softly, his voice edged with worry. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. The box slipped from her arms, scattering a paperback, a half-eaten granola bar, and the worn purse that had seen better days. She sank into a chair, the fight draining out of her, and whispered the truth. "He fired me." Daniel closed the book and set it aside. He leaned forward, his thin hand reaching for hers. She braced herself for disappointment, for the fear she knew he must feel. Instead, he said only 4 words. "I'm proud of you." The tears broke, then spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. It was both comfort and heartbreak. Pride, she knew, didn't pay prescriptions. But it was the one thing no one could take from her. And in that fragile, rain-soaked moment, Claire held on to it like a lifeline. The days that followed were gray and heavy, a blur of rejection letters and gnawing fear. Morning blended into night without distinction. Claire sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at the glow of her aging laptop screen as the cursor blinked mockingly at her. "We regret to inform you." The same sentence again and again, stamped onto her inbox like a curse. The bills piled higher on the counter envelopes with red letters she didn't have the courage to open. Daniel noticed her growing silence. Either way, she forced a smile when he asked about her job hunt. She hid the truth the way she had always hidden it, tucking the unpaid bills into a drawer, burying her despair beneath layers of determination. Still, it was eating her alive. At night, when the city outside their window grew quiet, Claire thought about the old man she had defended. She couldn't shake the image of his tired eyes or the way he had walked back into the rain without a word. Part of her resented him. He had cost her everything. But another part of her whispered that he wasn't to blame. The blame lay with Gregory, with the wealthy patrons who looked down their noses at anyone who didn't fit their image of belonging. And then exactly 1 week later came the knock at the door. It wasn't the timid tap of a neighbor or the dull thud of the mailman. It was sharp, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Claire opened the door to find a man in a black suit and cap, his posture crisp, his expression unreadable. In his hands, he held a thick, cream-colored envelope. "Miss Donovan," he asked. She nodded, her voice caught somewhere between suspicion and fear. "Signature, please." She scribbled her name on the digital pad, her hands trembling. The man tipped his cap, turned, and vanished down the hall without another word. The envelope was heavy, the paper unlike anything she had ever touched. Embossed in the corner in raised gold lettering were 2 words Pendleton Group, and her stomach lurched. She had heard of Pendleton Group, everyone had. A corporate empire that stretched across industries, technology, real estate, philanthropy. And at the center of it all was Edward Pendleton himself, a man as famous for his silence as for his wealth. He hadn't given a public interview in over a decade. To most, he was more myth than man. Claire slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife, her breath held tight. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat, almost regal. "Dear Miss Donovan, you are cordially invited to attend a meeting with Mr. Edward Pendleton on Friday morning at 10 o'clock. A car will arrive at your residence at 9:15 a.m. to escort you. The meeting will be held at Pendleton Tower, 50th floor. We look forward to your attendance. Respectfully, Eleanor Hale, Executive Assistant to Mr. Pendleton." Claire read it once. Then again. Then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more believable. Her first thought was that it had to be a scam. Some elaborate hoax designed to prey on desperation. But when Friday morning arrived, and the hums of a sleek, black sedan echoed outside their shabby apartment complex, the truth could no longer be denied. Neighbors peeked through blinds as the driver stepped out. His shoes polished to a mirror, shine his white gloves spotless. He opened the back door for Claire with a small nod, as though this was the most ordinary thing in the world. But nothing about it felt ordinary. Not to Claire. The ride into downtown Boston was silent, the city blurring past her window. Skyscrapers rose higher and higher until one dominated the horizon, Pendleton Tower. A spire of glass and steel, its edges sharp against the sky, its surface catching the morning light like a beacon. Claire felt small, impossibly small, as the car swept into a private underground entrance. The lobby was a cathedral of modern power, soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and a sculpture of twisted bronze that must have cost more than her apartment building. Her reflection stared back at her from the gleaming surfaces, a nervous woman in borrowed slacks and a blouse she had ironed twice to hide its age. And then she saw her, Eleanor Hale. Gregory's cousin, though, she carried none of his cruelty. She was poised, her blonde bob immaculate, her suit tailored with quiet precision. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "Miss Donovan," Eleanor said warmly, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure. Mr. Pendleton is waiting for you." Claire shook her hand, the surreal weight of the moment nearly buckling her knees. Eleanor guided her into a private elevator. There were no buttons, only a card slot Eleanor slid her badge into. The doors closed, and the car rose with breathtaking speed. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. Each floor they passed another reminder of how far from her world she had come. When the doors opened, sunlight poured in through glass walls that framed the city like a painting. The 50th floor. The very top. And Destiny was waiting. The elevator doors opened onto another world. The corner office stretched wide, its 3 glass walls framing the city like a god's window. The clouds hung low, as if Boston itself bowed beneath this spire of wealth and power. The carpet underfoot was soft enough to swallow footsteps, the furniture a careful balance of classic wood and sleek, modern steel. Every detail whispered authority. And there he was, Edward Pendleton. He stood near the window, his back straight, his suit tailored to impossible precision. His silver hair caught the morning light, and when he turned, his piercing blue eyes met hers. They were the same eyes she had seen across the dining room of the Silver Chalice, the same eyes that had looked at her from beneath a ragged coat. The frail old man and the titan of industry were one and the same. Claire's breath caught. Her knees threatened to buckle as her mind scrambled to reconcile the two images. The old man who had shuffled in from the rain. And this man, the myth, the billionaire, the legend. Miss Donovan. Edward said, his voice no longer raspy, but deep, resonant, and steady. "Thank you for coming." Her lips parted, but no words came. He gestured toward a chair, and she sank into it, clutching her purse as though it were a shield. Edward took his seat across the desk, but he didn't hide behind it. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the polished wood, his gaze fixed on her. "I imagine you have questions," he said. Claire nodded faintly. You were there, at the restaurant." "I was," he admitted with a small smile. "It is a habit of mine. From time to time, I shed the skin of Edward Pendleton and walk among my own businesses. I want to see them not through reports or polished tours, but as they truly are. People treat me differently when they don't know my name. They show me their real selves, their honesty, or their cruelty." He paused, his gaze distant for a moment, as though looking back through years of disappointments. "Most of the time, I find none of the values I speak of in boardrooms. I find greed, vanity, and indifference." His eyes sharpened, returning to her. "But you did something extraordinary. You defended the dignity of a stranger, knowing the cost. You stood where most would bow. That is rare, precious." Claire swallowed hard, her pulse thundering in her ears. "I lost my job," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And gained something greater," Edward replied firmly. He slid a leather-bound folder across the desk. Inside, printed neatly, was the outline of a new initiative. A program funded by the Pendleton Foundation designed to restore integrity and compassion to the corporate world. Employee welfare, community outreach, corporate accountability. The words blurred before her eyes as she tried to process them. "I want you to lead this," Edward said. "Not as a server, but as its director." Claire blinked at him, stunned. "Director, I have no degree. I've only ever worked tables. I'm not qualified." "You are more qualified than any graduate with a resume of polished lies." Edward countered, his tone unwavering. "I can hire people to count numbers and draft reports. What I cannot hire, what no money can buy, is character. Integrity. The courage to choose what is right when no one is watching. That, Miss Donovan, is what you have. And that is what this program needs." Her throat tightened, tears burning at the edges of her eyes. But Edward wasn't finished. He pushed a second letter toward her, a smaller envelope sealed with a Pendleton crest. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was a statement from Boston General Hospital signed by one of the nation's leading specialists. "Your brother Daniel's care," Edward said gently. "Covered, retroactively, fully, for as long as it takes." The dam inside her broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot with relief, disbelief and gratitude so overwhelming it stole her breath. For years, fear had been her constant companion. The fear of bills, of eviction, of losing Daniel to an illness they couldn't afford to fight. And now in an instant, it had been lifted. Claire buried her face in her hands, sobs shaking her shoulders. For the first time in years, the tears weren't from exhaustion or terror. They were from hope. Edward let the silence linger, giving her space to breathe, to feel, to finally imagine a tomorrow unchained from despair. And in that moment, for the first time since her mother's funeral, Claire Donovan allowed herself to believe in miracles. The silence in Edward Pendleton's office was broken by the click of the door handle. Claire turned her pulse quickening as Gregory Hale strode in with the self-assured swagger of a man convinced his future was about to begin. His best suit clung to him like armor, his hair slicked back, a practiced smile plastered across his face. Mr. Pendleton. Gregory beamed, extending a hand as though greeting royalty. What an honor. I was told you wanted to see me personally. I have to say, sir, this is the proudest day of my career. Edward did not take his hand. He sat back in his chair, calm, steady, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Gregory like a hawk eyeing prey. Yes, Mr. Hale. I wanted to see you. Please sit. Gregory lowered himself into the chair across the desk, still smiling, though his eyes flicked nervously toward Claire. His grin faltered when he saw her seated there, composed but watchful, her presence in this office utterly baffling. Miss Donovan, he stammered. I didn't expect to see you here. I hope there are no hard feelings about, well, about how things ended at the Silver Chalice. You understand. Of course, it was just business. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. Edward spoke instead, his voice quiet, but laced with steel. I was in your restaurant last week, Mr. Hale. Gregory blinked, confusion flashing in his eyes. Sir, if we had known, we would have rolled out the red carpet. Truly, my staff would have... No, Edward interrupted. His voice cut through the room, sharp and final. You did not know because I was not dressed as the Edward Pendleton you see before you. I was a tired old man in a worn coat asking for a table. The color drained from Gregory's face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his carefully rehearsed charm dissolving into panic. Edward leaned forward, his hands folded neatly on the desk. And do you recall how you treated me, Mr. Hale? You called me a vagrant. You sneered at me as though my presence contaminated your dining room. You ordered one of your employees, this woman seated beside you, to throw me out. Gregory's throat bobbed as he tried to swallow. I didn't realize, sir. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. If I had known, that is precisely the problem. Edward snapped, his voice rising for the first time. The room seemed to vibrate with its power. You only show respect when you believe someone has money. You bow to the wealthy and trample those with none. That is not leadership. That is cowardice. And it ends today. Gregory turned toward Eleanor, desperate. Cousin, please explain to him. Tell him. Eleanor stood motionless, her face expressionless, her silence a judgment more damning than words. Edward rose to his feet, tall and commanding. You are a disgrace to my company. You will not manage another Pendleton property, nor will you find easy refuge elsewhere. Your reputation for cruelty will precede you. He gestured toward the door. Security. The doors opened and 2 uniformed guards stepped inside. Gregory lurched to his feet, his composure gone, his face pale and sweating. Please, Mr. Pendleton. One more chance. I've given years of my life to... Enough, Edward said, his tone final. The guards took him by the arms, steering him toward the door. His eyes darted once more toward Claire, wide with shock, as though searching for pity. But there was none. She watched in silence, not with triumph, but with calm certainty. Justice was unfolding before her eyes. The door closed with a heavy click, leaving only the echo of Gregory's fall. For the first time in years, Claire felt the weight on her chest lift. Not entirely, not completely, but enough. Justice had been served, and with it the chance to begin again. Weeks turned into months, and Claire Donovan's world transformed. The life of late nights, carrying trays and swallowing exhaustion, gave way to mornings filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and decisions that shaped more than a single paycheck. She had stepped into a new realm, the world of boardrooms and foundations of influence and possibility. And though the marble floors and glass towers were intimidating at first, Claire found her footing one step at a time. At her side was Eleanor Hale, who proved not just a guide, but a true ally. Eleanor's sharp intelligence and steady composure became Claire's compass in a landscape filled with unfamiliar language budgets, mission statements, organizational charts. Patiently, Eleanor translated it all. She taught Claire how to draft a proposal, how to stand her ground in a room full of executives twice her age, and how to use her voice with precision rather than apology. There was no mockery, no condescension, only respect, in that Claire found the courage to grow. Together, they launched the Dignity First initiative. It began as a vision, a single folder slid across Edward Pendleton's desk. But under Claire's leadership, it grew into something real, something powerful. The program set new standards across Pendleton Group's hotels and restaurants, not just customer service training, but compassion training. Staff were encouraged to use judgment to treat each guest as human, not as a number. Reporting channels were opened so employees could speak without fear. Bonuses rewarded kindness, not just efficiency. Claire didn't direct from afar. She visited the kitchens, the laundry rooms, the break areas where the invisible workforce lived. She listened to the stories of housekeepers who had been ignored for years, dishwashers who felt disposable, servers who lived on the edge of exhaustion. Their words fueled her mission. When she spoke in meetings, she carried their voices with her. And at home, Daniel's health began to stabilize under the new treatments. The specialists Edward had secured gave him hope for the first time in years. His smile returned faint at first, then brighter, until it lit their apartment like sunlight through dusty blinds. They moved into a modest but comfortable place in a better neighborhood. Daniel converted his own room into a study, his textbooks spread across the desk, a future slowly taking shape. For Claire, every one of his smiles was proof that every battle, every sacrifice had been worth it. One crisp autumn afternoon, Claire found herself walking past the Silver Chalice. The marquee gleamed with the words, "Under new management." The windows, once cold and intimidating, now glowed with a softer light. She paused, curiosity tugging at her. Through the glass, she saw a new manager speaking with the staff, her body language open and collaborative. The air inside felt lighter, freer. Even the servers moved with less tension in their shoulders. And in the reflection of that glass, Claire saw herself. Not the weary waitress she had once been, hair pulled back, tight eyes, shadowed with fatigue. This woman wore confidence, like a second skin. Her blouse was tailored, her posture strong. She carried not a tray, but a briefcase filled with plans that could change lives. Yet deep down, she knew the truth. Her life had not changed because a billionaire had handed her a job. No. It had changed the moment she looked Gregory Hale in the eye and said, "No." The moment she chose dignity over silence. That single act had rewritten everything. And as the story closes, the lesson lingers. Sometimes, the smallest choice to speak up to, defend, to refuse, ripples outward in ways we can never predict. For Claire Donovan, it meant saving her brother, reshaping her future, and proving that integrity is the most powerful wealth of all. If this story moved, you take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Has there been a time when one small decision changed everything for you? We'd love to hear it. And if you believe more stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel and join us. Because together we can remind the world that even the quietest act of courage has the power to change a life.